It's been a busy couple of days. The Bank of Canada announced a rate increase, and in the next little bit, we're expecting another rate increase from the FOMC as well. Now, before we get into why rates are going up, let's take a look at what is the dual mandate of the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve and the FOMC. So they essentially have two mandates: balancing price stability, which is essentially inflation, with maximum employment in the economy. So what exactly is price stability? It means that the Fed is aiming to have an inflation rate of approximately 2% over the long term. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be 2% all the time, because you might have a year where it's 1%, you might have a year where it's 4%, or 3%, but the goal is that it averages out to 2. And they want to do that while balancing maximum employment. So what that means is they'll take a look at all the economic indicators and determine, given what's happening in the economy, is this the most amount of jobs that the economy can support? They take a look at various economic indicators and then determine where the economy is headed from an inflation perspective as well as an employment perspective. And then given that information, they'll make a decision of what the interest rate should be while accounting for how that interest rate is going to impact employment. So what we're seeing right now is high inflation. And what the Fed is doing is they want to increase interest rates. When rates go up, what the Fed is doing is incentivizing saving instead of spending. So individuals and businesses would spend less and save more. And then because there's less spending, demand goes down, and in the long run, prices come down as well. But inflation has gone up so much that it's causing the Fed to increase interest rates more than they've ever done before. In fact, this is the fastest increase in history. And so last week, after a pause since the beginning of the year, the Bank of Canada came out and increased interest rates by 25 basis points or 0.25%, bringing it up to 4.75%. And that's the highest we've seen in over 22 years. So the Bank of Canada took a pause since the beginning of the year on raising interest rates, and after almost 6 months, they've decided, okay, it's time to continue raising them. And so why did they do that? Well, there's two main reasons. GDP came in much higher than expected, and consumer spending was also higher than expected. And the fact that they raised interest rates opens up the door for them to continue raising rates. Very rarely does the Bank of Canada or the Fed come out and raise rates once and then stop. But what are some of the factors that may cause the Bank of Canada and the Fed to actually take a pause on interest rates going forward? Well, a few days after the Bank of Canada announced the rate increase, the jobs reports came out, and they actually found that instead of jobs increasing by 20,000, which was what they expected, the economy actually lost 17,000 jobs. And that's the first time in 9 months that job growth has been negative, which is really key because, again, when you take into account the dual mandate of the Fed, they want to balance inflation with maximum employment. And the fact that employment is coming down, that in turn is going to impact price stability, which is going to make price stability better as there'll be less demand for goods, and thus inflation will come down. So this is looking good. What are some other reasons that the Fed may decide not to increase rates? Well, debt levels. There's just way too much debt. The government is in debt, and if interest rates keep going up, that means that a larger portion of the federal budget will go towards paying interest. And that's bad for politicians because that means they'll have to cut programs in order to stay within their budget. And politicians rarely get elected for cutting things. And consumers are also in debt. Canada had the highest debt levels of any G7 nation, and in fact, Canadians have more debt than the entire GDP of Canada. And in the coming days, the US FOMC is also expected to announce if they're going to increase rates or not. There's rumors that they're not going to, that there's going to be a pause or a decline. I really think that they will continue to increase rates. There's just not enough information for them to be like, okay, this is it, we're going to stop. So even though rates are going up and we're experiencing some pain, I'm actually glad that the Fed is doing what they're doing. And that's because if we don't get inflation in check, then that's going to cause more problems and have further implications for all of us, including making the Canadian dollar and the US dollar weaker. And that's because when there's a lack of price stability in a currency, it causes individuals, businesses, and nations to lose trust in that currency. And then this is especially important for the US because if individuals and countries lose faith in the US dollar, then that means that it has implications and there is risk for the US dollar not being the world reserve currency. And if you want to hear more about me going deeper into the topic of world reserve currencies, be sure to check out this video right here. And because Canada is so connected and tied to the US from an economic point of view, that if there's any pain in the US economy, it can be felt in Canada as well. So for example, if the US decided that they didn't want to get inflation under control and they weren't going to raise interest rates, that would impact the US dollar and make it weaker, and that would in turn make the Canadian dollar weaker as well. And so when we think about the FOMC meeting coming up, will they decrease rates? I don't think that we're there yet. The first step would be for them to take a pause from the rate increases and then potentially decrease down the road. And also, that's not something that I want. Now, don't get me wrong, low interest rates are great, and you need to think about why the Fed is doing that. If they're decreasing interest rates, it means something is wrong with the economy, that the economy is sick. And so what they are going to do is decrease rates so it encourages spending and encourages the economy to continue to grow. Versus what I would really like is that interest rates stay at a consistent level for a long time. I think that would cause price stability everywhere, and I think that helps homeowners, it helps real estate prices, it helps businesses. I think that's really what we want instead of rates coming down and prices going up. Oh, and if we take a look at the overall economy, the numbers are looking good. GDP is coming on strong, consumer spending is coming on strong, job numbers are decent. So I really don't think that a pause or a decrease is going to happen this year. So if interest rates are going to continue to increase, which I really believe that they will, at least until the end of 2023, then what does that mean? Well, I'm going to give it to you straight. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. We're heading into some rough times. So you really need to get your financial house in order and be careful with your spending. If there's potential risk to your job, then make sure you're going above and beyond and making yourself valuable. Make sure that you're adding value to your employer so that they want to keep you on the team. Make sure that you're fully employed. So if you're working part-time right now, see if there's ways that you can work full-time. And if you're already doing all of that, maybe it's time to look for a side hustle, a way that you can make a couple of $100 a week or a month that'll help in the long run. Check out this video that I did on side hustles, and maybe one of these will work for you. And also plan for the worst. Make sure that you have your emergency fund if it's a couple of months of expenses saved up. Don't plan on, if you get a bonus at your job, maybe plan for you not getting a bonus this year. If you're expecting a raise or a promotion, maybe expect it maybe next year instead of this year. And if you're planning accordingly that prices will come down and you'll be okay, well, don't expect that. Expect that prices will continue to increase, and so you need to plan accordingly. And how does all of this connect to real estate? Do I think that real estate prices are going to come down because rates are going to continue to increase? Well, I really don't think so. There's so much demand out there for homes that individuals and families are willing to stretch themselves financially to get into home ownership. And one of the reasons for that is over the past couple of decades, home prices have only gone up, and it's seen as such a great investment. And especially as prices continue to increase, there's more and more FOMO, fear of missing out, that if they don't get in now, that they'll never be able to afford a home. And while some of that is true, I don't think it makes sense to put yourself in a worse financial position just to get into home ownership. And then the other thing is that rent is also increasing rapidly. And as quickly as rent is increasing in a lot of places and for a lot of individuals, it starts to make more sense to buy than to rent. And if you are looking to buy for yourself, make sure that you can afford it. Don't try and go for the maximum amount of mortgage that you get qualified for. Try and keep it within a reasonable budget. And also look for ways that you can offset costs, like house hacking. Maybe you rent out rooms, maybe you find something that has a second or third unit that you can rent out, or maybe that you can Airbnb for extra income. Those are all great ways to reduce your overall housing costs and make housing affordable while also being able to purchase something. And if you're looking for an investment property, make sure you do your research. Real estate prices aren't going up everywhere. You've got to look at the economic fundamentals of that area. Is immigration strong? Is there a lack of supply? Is there job growth in that area? And those are some of the reasons why areas like Ontario, Southern Ontario specifically, and Seattle, Washington are some of my favorite places to invest. Because in those areas, there's a housing shortage, and so there's more buyers than there are homes available. And that is causing prices to increase further. So what do you think? Are interest rates going to continue going up? Are we going to see more pain and hurt before things get better? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to get your opinion on this. If you haven't yet liked the video, please do so. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next week.